This episode of the Noble Warrior Podcast is brought to you by CK Lin Mindset Coaching for Entrepreneurs. Whatever mental blocks in your life you want to overcome as an entrepreneur, fears of failure, inability to take the actions you know there is to take, fear of success, 3 steps forward and 4 steps back, or even that thought of not feeling deserving after achieving all the success. Coaching is one of the most valuable tools you can have. It's an investment in yourself, and it can yield some of the highest returns. CK Lin has the skills that will empower you to achieve the most accelerated results you've dreamed of. To help you get started, CK is offering podcast listeners a free strategy session with him, a $1,000 value. Visit talkwithck.com and schedule your free session today.
I'm really excited and energized by the amount of interest about this whole intersection of psychedelics, meditation, and technology. And I'm really inspired by also the fact that these are a group of really smart and motivated people. So it's not just some random people interested in this, but these are conscientious entrepreneurs, investors, scientific researchers, therapists, all coming together, really keen on the convergence of all these topics. So that's the number one takeaway. Is like I'm getting excited by the fact that other smart people are really excited about this too. The second takeaway from that is there's a little bit of a creative chaos there. So which is good, as in any kind of new movement. There's not a lot of questions, but not a lot of people have clear vision and or answers to this. So I think there's still room for new ideas, new thoughts, new leaders, new opportunities to emerge from all this energy. So these are my top 2 takeaways. And of course, meeting like-minded people that I actually have a resonance with. That's, to me, the biggest takeaway with all of these type of gatherings.
Yeah, thanks. I overlap strongly on that. I certainly on your second one about having this idea of, it feels like a lot of people gathering and either because of a sense of something, they're just, becoming present about trying to solve a problem that feels like it's on everybody's tip of their tongue, but nobody has quite yet verbalized exactly what that is and what the end goal is. But I think that we're all drawn for different reasons to consider that something extremely worthy, whether it is, purely to think about healing or about growing or about wisdom or about, so many other things that may be attracting people, including just a general curiosity about making progress in an area that has not made progress in a while. So people, for sure, I travel a lot, and it's and I'm very, very picky with the people I engage with, and I have to say that I was overwhelmed by the number of individuals that I was able to engage with and respect, intellectually and personally. Overall, it was a terrific event on so many fronts.
Why don't you actually say a little bit more about that, about the meeting people part? Because one thing that you did say as you get older, get more successful, your time is still the same, right? Everyone still have 24 hours and 7 days. And as such, you need to be a little choosier about who you want to surround yourself with, who you want to engage with, who you want to get new ideas from. So what are some of your mental models, your criteria in terms of which events to go to or who you want to engage with? Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, and it's getting... I was talking about with a friend, and it's kind of funny that, sometimes you may feel, you're in an environment and your gut response is, I don't really know why I'm at this event, and I don't know what these people are talking about. I don't know what I'm doing here. So that was definitely not the case in this instance. I think it's a question, as regards people, I have a very low tolerance for BS of any sort, and that includes just people who have not queried themselves deeply and therefore sort of masquerading to an extent or another something that they don't want to show. So I love engaging with people who have been able to transcend that a little bit and are open and both giving and also demonstrating a certain ability to open up to people that they haven't met before. And that's hard, and it's sadly rare, and this people who are on a path of kind of just wanting to engage truthfully, wanting to maybe go on a path that I like to think is about wisdom, about thinking about life, about how we make things, why things are the way they are, how we can make them better. I've been an entrepreneur for almost 30 years now, and that's always been on my mind. I think that's the great thing about entrepreneurs. The focus is always on making something better or having an ability to see something that other people don't see, as to either that is not working properly. So both having the ability to see what's not working properly and simultaneously having the ability to come up with an idea that could make those things better. So there were, any number of those people at the event that are really driven, passionate, where there's kind of an integrated approach between their, the mind, the heart, and the gut, where you can see and sense that it's something deeply personal that is driving them to do what they're doing. And as I say, that's something I'm incredibly drawn to, that passion, that authenticity, and something that we need a little bit more of.
So are there any specific events or conferences or groups that you have found to have a higher probability of meeting such people and have such conversations or engage in such ventures together?
Not really. I mean,
okay.
I wouldn't single out any event. I think that we've done I pretty much attended every technology conference of meaning. TED obviously will be at the top of my list once a year. I've done any number of summits. Now this, and I'm beginning to do smaller events that people have engaged. You will always find, I've been lucky to never leave empty-handed. I always am able to connect with somebody that I think presents that, but maybe not the entire event. And so for me, it's rare to have both the ability for the organizers of the event, as well as the attendees and the speakers, to really be very aligned. I still see too frequently that the organization of the event can be driven by, it's a business and we're here to draw as many people with as many great ideas as possible, and we need to put some monkeys on the stage so I can attract these people. And, and so, that's definitely not what I'm interested in. I have to say that this past conference was one where I was really very taken by the synthesis of the three groups. So the organization, the speakers, and the attendees, all seemingly extremely well aligned, and that's also, it really is quite unique from other events that I've attended.
So I have to share something myself, right? Well, I don't have to, I get to. One of the things I really love to go to events, exactly as you said, it's not so much for the content, although that may be sexy and interesting, like, ooh, I wonder who so-and-so is going to say. But most importantly for me is these type of, off the side conversations and chance encounters. And in the beginning of my own journey to go into conferences I try to be as calculating and strategic as possible. But these days I just go with an intention of actually connect deeply with one or two or three people, because I trust that this is my belief. Whoever I meet is just perfect. I don't need to go seek or strive to meet someone. If that happens, of course, happy to do that. But when I go to conference these days, it's more organic. So I'm curious to know your journey in just meeting other human beings in general. Do you take on that same approach, or is it more strategic, more calculating, and then lay out things?
No, I was smiling while you were describing that, because I cannot recall a single event that I've ever been to where I've had any sort of agenda or plan. I'm very intuitive about that, and I believe that if I have to meet certain people, it will happen. I do agree with you that stating an intention, I think, is very helpful. Coming into it, or at least being very clear about what you're bringing to that event, and not so much what you want to get out of the event, helps a lot. And in the context of this particular conference, it was amazing to just have any number of synchronicities about saying, let's say, have you met so and so, for argument's sake, and it happened that 3 or 4 other people had told me exactly the same thing. So I was like, okay, I think I need to talk to so and so. So there's definitely you feel almost there's a connection across the group, and you can sense certain ways of thinking, of being, that somehow draws you to very like-minded people, and you just need to be attuned to them.
So I want to come back to your own journey a little bit, because let me share, to the people who are listening a little bit. You've been an entrepreneur for 30 years rather. You have achieved certain level of success, and now you have exited from the business, and effectively you are looking to see what's next. What are the other opportunities? What are the new passions that you can tap into? So in many ways, other entrepreneurs, especially new ones, are looking at you like, oh wow, Andrew's made it, right? He's achieved what I wanted in 10, 20, 30, however many years. So to me, entrepreneurship is one of the ultimate transformational journey that you can take on, right? So now that you have, quote unquote, arrived to a major milestone, what could you share with us about your own journey from day one of being an entrepreneur to now 30 years later, from the perspective of what have you learned, the secret of being an entrepreneur?
Well, look, I'll probably start more from the end. I think at the core, I'm probably not staying probably the earliest business, starting, you have different ideas, you have an idea that you think is cool or unique, you're excited about it, you go that way as you evolve, your thinking evolves with it, and as the size of the business evolves, you also grow with that. I think that one of the critical elements on this, my last business, which I spent, over 15 years building with an amazing team, an amazing partner, and really just exited, has been more about getting to a stage where the business and myself just very aligned, from the perspective that, we never built the business to exit per se. We were also very distinct in that we never raised any money, we never had any debt, we ran a fully virtual organization. We tended to, people ask me, what do you do? And towards the end, over the last few years, I pretty much said, we nurture misfits, because we love to find these remote, passionate people about topics that, nobody else seems to really care about, and they care deeply about. And those are the things that I really love to engage with people that are like-minded, and I really don't care what the passion is. It could be virtually anything. I just want to see that element is there, and there's something about the moment you go deep into a subject and you explore its richness, there's you cannot help but be a little bit awed in what happens in the process. So that's the journey. So that, and part of the element with myself as the entrepreneur in the mix is not only one of growing myself, but about having the business as a structure that is an expression of myself, and that helps me to grow in the process. And it's kind of a feedback loop. As you learn, you help the organization to learn more and to evolve. And that's probably the most rewarding part of the journey. The financial part, of course, always plays a role, but I could argue that certainly for the last 3 years or so, I've lived in a state of being extremely grateful for any number of things, and for all intents and purposes, I had already reached a stage of of contentment on the financial side. I didn't really. So now it's with a full exit and a very meaningful exit, then there are certain, I feel that new challenges, new responsibilities open up, and that allow me to continue to do some of the things that I've been meaning to do for a long time. So in my personal case, I felt that the financial portion of the journey was an important one, and that I had, and I've been thinking about this for a very long time. I always felt that, that my journey would be one of reaching a certain level of financial success, and then being able to use that position to then impact areas that are of interest or concern of mine. And obviously now the entire consciousness part is one that is of great interest, and that's why I'm getting more involved, exposing myself, sharing ideas, sharing experiences, and that. So really, how much wisdom and all of that? Well, a lot. I think lately I synthesize it, in as few nuggets as possible. Certainly, the way we operated the business was about focusing on, number one, was keep the business going. Number two, keep the business growing, but never forget about number one. Particularly as we didn't have a fallback position as a fully private, non-funded company, but at the same time, we never did not have a profit. We've been profitable every year since inception. So clearly, that was something that we were doing. Also, just the way that we like to operate, we held the belief, for the longest part, fairly unconscious, but any number of things that we did demonstrated that I believe in, in value creation. So we're very focused and constantly investing in making our products better, and the services that we offer, and to have as much of what I was mentioning earlier, to find people who are genuinely passionate about what they do. And what we found in the process, particularly with an online business, that the one thing you can't fake online is passion and authenticity. So that actually became a competitive edge of ours as well, to see that our team was free to be as creative as possible, and that's the way, this nurturing environment for them. And the second one is to enable this value creation with as many values as we could bring to the table. I have certain beliefs about how we treat people, types of people we find. We're not looking for the Ivy League Superman, etc. We actually, you'll find that we have people who are they're incredible individuals, but they're incredibly normal individuals, I would say that. And they're also, and that's what each of us, I hold the title of also, chief misfits in our business. And some people, would approach me and say, Andrew, we're not quite sure about this misfit title. It seems, I don't know how I feel, but I said, no problem, I'll take the chief misfit. I don't have a problem with that. And really, I feel very strongly. I may not look, a little bit normal on the outside, but I promise to you that deep inside, I'm just the same misfit that they are. And if it's misfit in the way that they look, if they think, or so on and so forth, doesn't really matter. That's what we've been looking at. So this combination of creating value and delivering it with values is something that we've seen has an incredible resonance in the U.S. market, and it sounds oversimplistic, but I would argue that anybody can truly deliver that consistently over a long period of time will get rewarded, because that's exactly what the system seems to lack. But people realizing that you care deeply about something and you're not there to you're not designing everything to extract value from people you engage with. So we're very focused on, we believe we're okay with the idea that we're going to give you something first, and if you feel that we've done a good job, then please give us something back. But it's really up to you when I engage. And I remember, in the early days, I mean, literally, I was a one-man show. So this goes back about 15 years ago. And I was getting attacked quite badly for trying to monetize my blog at the time. And, and I was one of the first bloggers who became successful, really making a substantial amount of money from his blog. And, I know if somebody or a group of people decided that it was just not cool and that they were going to let me know about it. And it became so intense at one point that I really thought, maybe I should stop. And then out of the blue, I got an email from somebody saying, "Hey, Andrew, I love the blog. Could you help me out? I'm looking for this product." I forget what it was. And I took about 15 minutes to reply back to him. He almost immediately, responded back and said, "Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time and the recommendation. I really appreciate it." And blah, blah, blah. And at the end, just the one line, I said, "Now, please could you let me know where I should click on your website so that you can get a commission on my purchase?" And I had this epiphany. I understood, from that exchange, I understood what the real relationship was that I was creating with the audience. And the real audience that I wanted to engage with was people like him, who understood that there was just an exchange and that they were willing and to share and to give back in return. And so I said, okay, there's going to be some free riders. There's going to be people who don't care or don't like me or whatever. And I was fine with that because I understood or felt that the majority of people were there in a very balanced exchange of what was happening. And I was being very, I felt I was being very honest in what I was bringing to the table. So, and really that seeded a lot of the thinking for the rest of it. And I was just focused on saying, okay, just share the passion, share the ideas, find more people, keep building, keep growing, and end up somewhere. And we ended up in an interesting place in our industry with companies that had, raised up to $50 million or more dollars, and where we were more profitable than they were, having raised zero. So really, this is not, and I take a small portion of the credit for having started the journey and things like that, and obviously continue to do certain things, but ultimately it was, really amazing team effort from everybody involved, which is probably also an important learning, certainly from where I started. The idea, I think in my case, the idea of this genius solo Superman entrepreneur didn't apply. I found an amazing business partner where we had extremely shared business values. We found many other people like that across, and ultimately it was really just an amazing team and culture that we built in the process that really made things successful. And I think that that's something that is not as often celebrated as the individual hero. So I feel more that I'm there's a leadership role, there's this mentorship, stewardship, but there's also an incredible day-to-day work from an amazing team of people in that. So
thanks for sharing that. So I have a follow-up question there, because number one, let me address one thing. So there's a reason why we connect so well, because I really resonated with what you said about being a misfit. So, because, part of my being is I don't feel quite understood by others. So there's misfit to another misfit. Awesome.
You bet. And only misfits really understand other misfits.
There you go. Yeah. So, but to your point of actually just charting the path, following your passion, and then just have that faith and trust that, hey, what you're providing is a fair value exchange to the people that you serve. And But in the beginning part of it, I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit, because it's easy to look back and say, yeah, I always knew that this was going to turn out, right? But in the beginning part of it, for a lot of people listening, myself included, is, hey, we are charting the path, following my passion, following my principles, but there's not a whole lot of positive feedback coming in, right? So then in that moment, how did you sustain your faith that this was the right thing to do, even though there wasn't a whole lot of movement or momentum coming back just yet?
Yeah. I mean, look, and we're talking about this last business, so I'll focus on the beginning of this last business. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting situation, because really I was doing, I had, so just about 3 years prior to starting my last business, I resigned from managing a company, and I was only an employee of for 2.5 years of two different businesses, kind of transition. But I realized very quickly that I make a very lousy employee. And that I'm only comfortable, running my own destiny, so to speak. And it's not about not getting along with people. I just feel, I've always been very driven by, an individual mindset and about wanting to have that freedom. And 3 years prior then, where it became, I had a very interesting package. I had helped a company IPO, but nothing, I was by no means wealthy. I was moderately comfortable, and ultimately ended up investing all of the money in trying to set up different ventures. Probably the two that were of most interest to me and that ultimately seeded the ideas for this business was, one is I wanted to either run a Netflix in the UK, and if that didn't work, then to set up a competing play to Netflix in the UK. I mean, there was some unique aspect. I had a deep understanding that Netflix was going to radically alter the landscape, and I was one of the earliest people to kind of bring that out. And I was based in the UK at the time. But I engaged, I did a lot of work on so many different fronts. Then I looked at TiVo, the entire, DVR revolution, etc. But really became very enmeshed in everything that would label digital entertainment convergence, and I became an expert in that area. Really early advent, you have to remember that, the first smartphone had not yet been released then, and what I would call the earliest smartphone was probably the handspring visor was just around the corner. And but for some reason, the ideas were great. I had amazing engagement. I was able to learn a lot in the process. I was able to be exposed to some big ideas with some big people, but ultimately none of the stuff that I was working on led to anything. And obviously over the 3 years, money had been taken down, and I was really running pretty much empty. I actually ended up, substantial credit card debt, and but I still held that the idea that this was what I needed to do. So out of frustration with some of the, this lack of movement on the B2B side that I was doing, I decided to, a friend was running a large blogging company in Europe, and he said, well, why don't you start blogging? And I said, okay, fine. So I needed something to talk about. So I started blogging on a B2B basis about all the ideas of entrepreneurship, about, what I felt was happening in the particular area of digital entertainment convergence. And out of the blue, really, I just non-stop, my phone would not stop ringing, a lot of support for my ideas, etc. A lot of inbound calls from the US, the likes, Best Buy, Walmart, and so on and so forth, kind of everybody saying, we'd really love to work with you, and so on and so forth. But I was really getting to the end. I mean, the maximum of my frustration of a B2B environment, and B2B in itself had never been my passion. I mean, my real passion is the B2C market. I love engaging at the consumer level. It's something I understand very well. So I kind of said, I became curious. I said, well, it's interesting that out of the blue now I'm getting so much interest on the B2B front. And I said, I wonder what the B2C market, how the B2C market might respond. But then again, I needed something to talk about. So I think at the time I was reading an issue of Inc. magazine, and they had an ad for the Palm Trio, which was, for me, the coolest first smartphone. Really just radically. And I had this eureka moment where everything that I had been working for the last 3 years, I understood that the future of this digital entertainment convergence I've been talking about was going to happen on this device. And so I had a wealth of ideas and knowledge about that, and I just started writing. And really it took off very rapidly. And then, my friend Loic, who was running this blog company, would call me up once a month and say, so Andrew, how you doing? I'm like, yeah, great. And he's like, what are the numbers? And I'm like, wow, it's rising, more and more people, and I forget where it was. And then would ask me, how are you doing financially there? I said, well, last month I made $0. So he'd call me a second month and say, how are you doing? I said, well, I made $50. And then you'd call me again, month 3, and say, how are you doing? I said, I made $500, So I think he stopped calling me months 6 or 7 when I was doing 5K a month, and then it continued to grow from there. And he's like, okay, I'll stop calling you now. I think you're doing fine. And that was kind of the launch. But I really, I wouldn't necessarily recommend to people to do what I did, which was really very close to, I kind of had this image that if I failed and I really came very, very close to the edge of that precipice, that I might very well end up cleaning streets for the rest of my days. But at that particular time, I really felt very strongly that if I was about, my early 30s, that if I didn't take that decision right there and then, I would not have the opportunity to take that decision again later in life. I would be too beholden to a particular decision that I had made. I would no longer do that. So it was right there or never. And I guess I went all the way on that one and felt like almost a personal challenge of life kind of asked me, say, how far would you go for this? And I kind of said, well, I would go all the way. And that's when things kind of started turning around. Again, I really would not recommend that people follow that per se.
Were you married at the time? In that moment? Did you have a family at the time?
I did not. No, I was very conscious of that, which was also why I was married in my late 30s. I became a father in my early 40s. A lot of it was delayed because I was very conscious that I was making decisions that were going to have major repercussions, and being in an environment like that where you have major financial repercussions is not something that I felt comfortable envisaging, to have a family and have to put them through that. So it's a little bit like driving recklessly. I feel I'm okay doing that when I'm alone in the car and hopefully when there's nobody else on the road, but I would not want to do that with other people in the car. So, I think that only as I started getting kind of rebuilding financially that I feel comfortable to do that in a meaningful way.
So you accumulated a lot of knowledge in the digital convergence, and then you stumble upon Trio, and then you knew that this was a trend that's coming, and you believed that, you trusted that, you doubled down on the blog, and you also happen to have a great support network. Louis, right? Was it his friend?
Yeah.
Who calls you regularly to provide that moral support, that checking in, that accountability, and make sure that you don't do anything unwise should things should hit the fan, so to speak. And then you follow, and that trend took off, and here you are. Fast forward. Would that be a good recap of what you shared with us?
Very much. I think that there were there were other inflection points along the way, but in terms of understanding just the lift off, that was it was a very rapid period of about a year where, it went from 0 to meaningful lift off that allowed me to then continue to grow the business on the back of that. And over 15 years, it's, the nice thing for me, and, if there are people not, I think it was Einstein that said that he felt that the seventh wonder of the world was, compound interest. So obviously having the opportunity to have a business that runs relatively smoothly, there's always been ups and downs, but that is profitable consistently over a long period of time. And, we grew organically throughout, but it ended up, becoming a very meaningful business. So it was just about maintaining that direction. Going back to what I said earlier, so number one, keep the business going. Two, keep the business growing. But if shit hits the fan at any given time, then okay, you stop growing, but you make sure. And we had that, we're talking about a company. I mentioned the palm tree as, the key product that made our company. And at one point, palm accounted for 95% of our revenues. And the company imploded very rapidly. Most people who saw us then were like, oh, well, thanks for all the hard work. You were great, but bye-bye. You're out of the picture. And actually we weren't, because we had seen that with the demise of palm, the carriers had increased dependency on BlackBerry. And then you go, oh, BlackBerry, I've heard about that company. And yeah, well, it did rather well for also a small period of time. So we went from a 95% dependency on Palm to a 60% dependency on BlackBerry. But then again, BlackBerry disappeared in a very short period of time. But, we had learned, and we had, we had a very substantial community, tens of millions of people. And our community members were typically much smarter than we were. So they were telling us and saying, hey guys, there's this thing called Android around the corner. It's really important. You should look at it. And we're like, okay, let's have a look at that. So by the time Crackberry, which was our site for BlackBerry fans, started to die down, we already had Android Central at the ready for the next loop. So, there were really some major inflection points. It felt like our business was crashing every so often, and took about 7 years or so. In 2007, we were voted number one fastest growing by the Inc. 500 on the e-commerce front, because actually to monetize the media that we were creating, we were actually powering e-commerce stores in the beginning. But between 2007 and 2010, 11, that entire e-commerce business also. So not only did we have the media decay, but we had the e-commerce decay, and then we had to figure out ways to start monetizing advertising. So it's been, a roller coaster, and thankfully for the last 5 years or so, the rate of change, it's always there, but there was enough of a lower rate of change for us to maintain a much more accelerated growth curve, and then we ended up. So it was, I'd say, amazing first few years, and really you think you're on top of it, and basically the business almost dies, but we keep everybody on board, and everybody's working, but just keeping the business afloat for maybe another 5 years, and then the last 5 years, things really start turning around, and we build a very meaningful business in that third phase.
So let me unpack that a little bit. So what I hear is also cultivate relationship with your end user, and then listen to them because they tend to be smarter, and as well as I also hear in between the lines of anticipating change, because one thing that they say, one thing that's constant in life is that change will always happen, or something like that, right?
So I think on both those fronts, I'll start with the second one. So this is very much just on a personal basis. Managing change is kind of my gifts, in the sense I really see quite far around the corners. I'm very, very good strategically, and I had the benefit of not being CEO of the business. I was president of the business, and my business partner, gave me a lot of leeway to explore, wander around, make mistakes, and I just go out, I look, what's happening and how the market is shifting, and try to get a sense, and then I go back to the team, report back from what I sense is coming and how we need to get ready for the next wave. And then obviously I'm not the only one. Other people are also keeping their eyes and ears open, and they feed that back into the loop. And based on that, we were lucky to, having experienced all of these things at the beginning, to understand that only those who responded very rapidly had a chance of making it. And we, for example, with Android, we were actually slightly late, and when I say slightly, maybe 6 months, but that was enough to give room to early competitors that really had an edge, and it took us longer there to regain the leadership position than it would otherwise. So we continued to learn and understood that really it was critical to our survival, to our resilience, to be prepared for every time the market changed. Okay, and I'd say, I sort of joke that pretty much every 18 months or so, we had to be prepared to be running a completely different company to what we had before, and either completely different because the revenue sources were different, or the mechanics of that revenue creation, or there was a dynamic in the market about changing operating systems, whatever it may have been. The second one with the community, superbly important, that we feel, so in a traditional, again, I'm very focused on a B2C environment, traditionally, you need this early adopter crowd who are the ones who are going to be your most fervent supporters, advocates, and so on and so forth, and they kind of help you build the business. And then people go, well, then you go phase 2, you cross the chasm, you want to mass market, and blah, blah, blah. And then you pretty much leave those early adopters aside, because you go, it's too small a market, and it's like, well, thanks for having helped us at the beginning, but really now, we're very focused on this mass audience. And I've seen this play out, same beef I have with Netflix, for example, I've had for the last few years, is that, part of my interest at the 17 years ago was crazy movie buff, and Netflix had this amazing engine that you could just keep hammering at, and it was unbeatable, and it was very much designed for that power user. If you were a movie buff, there was no better place to go than Netflix. Today, it seems to have left that entire market aside. I seem to just lose myself there. I have no clue what to watch. I'm very picky, and so the entire engine that they had previously to do that is no longer there. So you see this happening. So we were very clear that the only way that we could make it from generation to generation, let's say every 18 months, was with the help and support of that core audience. And so, but we understood that obviously the needs of this core audience, let's call it a power user crowd, and our average user were not the same. So we had to, but we understood that, and we were willing to make an investment and continue to make an investment in that power user base, even if we lost money on it or we made no money on it. It didn't matter. We felt very strongly that those were people who had helped us along the way, and that we would continue to support. One of the examples is we set up a YouTube brand called Mr. Mobile, very popular. I think he's getting close to 1 million followers now, but that channel, that brand was created almost entirely to appeal to that power user audience, so that they can continue to feel that we were, supporting them, and we were, but where we knew that it was going to take a very long time for us to start monetizing that, and so we didn't. But and so doing that consistently over 15 years, we've gained an enormous amount of goodwill from that community and from other people who've seen, it's the famous saying that, you can fool some people sometimes, you can't fool other people all the time. So, since that was never a game that we had, I think, this also leads me to another point that just came up. We felt very strongly that, and I've seen it many times over, it may be that because of the dynamics that we had of a private business, where really making a bad choice, making a big mistake could mean the demise of the business. So one thing we're very conscious about from the beginning is that we would not take shortcuts at any time. We would not, if it was an SEO game, we weren't going to play tricks on the SEO to have an advantage in the short term, but really risk the business in the long term. It was like, they made no sense. And every time there's always an opportunity, somebody says, we can make more money faster, we can do this. You start thinking about things that are, that start veering off your core values, or the ones that we had stated internally. And we just said no, and repeatedly said no. And we allowed people to kind of say, look, this is not what we're after. You don't need to go there to try to figure out how you can extract more, etc. Because we believe that this will do nothing but ultimately kill our business in the long term. So it's not going to go there.
So you had a commitment to stay within your core value rather than playing the gimmicks. That's what it sounded like. Yeah,
again, I think it goes back with just being very honest with keeping in line with what we're doing. Again, we're running a business. Everybody's conscious that, should we not be successful financially, then we don't have a business. So it's not about, not doing that. It's just about the way that we do it, doing so in a way that felt true to the ideal that we had about what we wanted to do, the level of quality, for example, that we want to deliver to our users, or the types of products, whatever it may have been, that we didn't want to stop doing that just because there was a way for us to extract more value in the short term.
So I have actually two directions that we can go to. I wanted to help the people who are listening to this, because you're an expert in building brands and building audience, right? Based on everything that you share with us. So assuming you actually have no more brands, no list, no audience that you can leverage, you only have what you know now, like knowing what you know now and nothing else, right? And can you walk us through what tactical things one may do going from 0 to 100 people, right? Kevin Kelly, 0 to 1,000 true fans, 0 to 10,000, and so on and so forth. So that way people they're inspired by the lesson and want to take action, they can actually execute on that. What would you say if someone who's listening to this want to go from 0 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000?
So the thing that I would caveat is, the operational side, I'm no longer as acutely aware of how we go about building a new brand, from scratch online today. I think it's gotten, incrementally harder. We even find it hard at our level to introduce a new brand. So I leave that aside in terms of what I think the core for me.
Okay.
Again, assuming that I'm talking about a B2C environment, I think that having a clarity of vision is core to be able to share that passion about whatever the topic might be. It might be a product, it might be a service, it might be an app. It doesn't really matter. But to do it in a way that really, being very honest with yourself, you haven't been cutting corners, you're not trying. I've seen the other thing that I personally hate is people who go after a market and they start to target the least knowledgeable people in that market, because they go, these people don't know anything. So, we can sell them a lower value product, but you can do the same thing to better inform people in that audience. So I'm a firm believer that you want to, from the get-go, to know that you have a really solid product is you take the most knowledgeable person in that particular field and you put it to a test with him or her, and if it passes, then you have a really interesting product. Because in my opinion, or service or solution in general, I don't believe that suddenly going after, they're just not interested. I know people who do that and run successful businesses. It's just not something I'm interested in. I believe that I want to go to the very top of the pyramid and making sure, because if we can pass the lens and the filter of the power user to demonstrate that we really, we've given it our all, we're doing it there, then they're going to be the first people to support you, to spread that audience. They may not necessarily interfere to see that there's a poor product in the market, and I'll go, well, obviously there's people who don't know who are buying this thing. But if you're doing something that is vetted by that power user audience, then they become advocates for what you're doing. And as we discussed earlier, sadly, there are too few examples, or they're much rarer to find people who go in that direction to really push it hard. But those are the companies that ultimately really, really stand out and make it. And, and I'm not necessarily talking here about, the multi-billion-dollar companies. You can find more successful companies, but of whatever size, I'm very focused in always assuming that there's something in what we're doing that you want to be as close, you want to be in the top tier performer. You don't need to be the best, but you want to have an understanding. What does it mean there? So for example, design was a very important element in our growth. So we had a particular design, our brands had a particular identity, and all of that really was a competitive advantage. And we had the benefit of a phenomenal creative director, but also understanding that we it's almost like you engage and you respect the best craftsmen in that area that you want to imbue your product or service with a dose of that, and you're not going to do it by going down. So I think everything carries a particular message about what you want to do. It's a bit of the this way. I'll describe, so a kind of side story. My parents lived in Japan for a couple of years, and I was studying architecture at the time, so I went to visit, and I became really amazed to see how almost every single interaction that I had was ritualized in one way or another, and enriched the experience in the process. So one day I went to a paper shop, and I decided that I wanted to run a little experiment to buy the least expensive thing that I could find in the store, and I settled on a pencil, literally one pencil. So the pencils were displayed in a glass case, and let's say there were about 30 pencils there, and I started poking at the pencil, and the person, the woman, saleswoman there would take it out, both hands, bow her head, present it in front of me, and every time I would do this, and eventually I pick one, and I try the pencil. Eventually I settled on one pencil. That's the one pencil. And then she grabbed the pencil, bowed her head again, kind of acknowledging that this is the pencil that I had selected. Went out, got some silk paper, wrapped the pencil inside the silk paper, grabbed some gift paper, wrapped the pencil inside the gift paper, grabbed the bow, put in the bow, grabbed the bag, put some silk paper in the bag, put the entire pencil in the bag, bow on the bag, bowing to me again, giving me the bag. I paid, I forget, $5 for this, and I just had like the most valuable pencil I had ever purchased in my life. I was scared of burning it just because of all the went into it. So, but ultimately, and so this is a very, you're present and you can see everything that's happening. I think that the same thing happens at an unconscious level, and that really people, and they may not know this, but instinctively I think that people can read when somebody is doing something with care, with attention, and when somebody is not. I think that in the same way that we are very good at, for example, discerning if somebody is smiling or laughing generally, we're equally good, but more unconsciously able to discern if, with what value something has been created and what it's delivered. So, to think, I've come across too many times other people don't care about the ultimate delivery of something, thinking, well, people are not going to notice. And I disagree completely. I think that people always notice. And one of two things, they either notice unconsciously or they can notice consciously, and then they may not say anything about it, good or bad, but it doesn't mean that they haven't received the message about what went into the creation process of whatever it is that you're delivering. So I think some of the intent from the beginning just needs to be there. And it needs to be a genuine intent. And at least that's the way that, we felt we wanted to engage with our audience, with our team, with other people we worked with. And that's also why many times, we've been just as selective with people working for us as we have people working with us, so partners and others. And it wasn't just an issue of saying, how much money can we make with you guys, etc. And the more strategic the partner, the more likely it was that we were going to make sure that we had the partner at least, if not sharing all of our values, could be as well aligned as we could. And having the benefit of a company, where we didn't have any external investors, we could take the high road by saying, we just don't want to work with you guys, or we don't feel that you're the right party to work with us. Other people, again, it ends up being a privilege, but it was something very important to us to deliver from the get-go. So, arguably, the real privilege of running a private company is a little bit of that.
So, question actually. So, as you grow your organization, you go from 1 to 50 to 100 to 150, right? Denbar's number, 150, that's the extent of, how you can maintain relationship with one another. Then the company continued to grow, 200, 300, 500, etc. So there is the challenge for any founders or executives is how do you actually ritualize this message, these core values beyond the 150? One may say it's easier, quote unquote, to maintain ritual, right? These values, these conversations, this focus on what's important from the founders on top downwards to everyone else in the organization. How do you continue to, perpetuate that as the company grow at a really fast rate?
So first, our business got to, under 100 people. Maybe we didn't have that. One of the ways that we did it is by really creating sub-units, so small units that might typically have between, 4 and 8 people. And they typically hold themselves, very accountable to each other. I mean, this is an environment where, people will not stay quiet if they feel that somebody is just not delivering what they need to be delivering to the team. And they first would address that within the team. And then if they can't address it within the team, then they would, bring it further up. What we've seen over time is that, it gets harder, if you're in a high growth environment, obviously doing that. So I'm talking in our case, we have a gradual organic growth and it's easier to manage. That's one of the elements. The second one is, we have a filter of just already the type of people that we bring on board. I'd say that probably about 60 or 70% of the people on the team came from within our communities. So they're people who were active on our forums or that, and somebody reached out and basically said, look, I've been doing this for so long, or they kind of came on our radar and wanted to become more active at the core of the organization or the business. So they already had all of the values of the passion. And so, when you have that, we've really almost never been successful at using recruitment agencies to bring the type of people that we want to the table. And most of the time it's been from word of mouth or people that we've met with in the community, or we can put out the word to our audience that we're looking for so-and-so, and more often than not somebody will suddenly appear that fits the criteria that we're looking for. And that's helped, I think over the years, it's held the culture in place rather well.
Beautiful. So what about the internal process? Because as a leader, as an executive, you had to ultimately, your decisions impacts everyone else, right? So how do you then cultivate your own decision accuracy, your decision power, as well as hone your own grit? Right, so that way you're not rattled by uncertainty is coming your way, and then you make certain emotional decisions, and then it turns out to be wrong, etc. So can you walk us a little bit through the journey that you had to go through to cultivate these capabilities?
Look, I think at the core, and certainly in my thinking and decision making, is at any time that you cannot bet. You don't want to bet the house on any one bet. So, risk management is a core skill that you develop over time, and the way that we had it was, in our particular case, we had the benefit of having resilience via multiple brands. So the likelihood that any one brand something could happen at a one brand level was okay, but it wouldn't disturb the whole ship. Then we had the same thing on the revenue front, let's say, with at least 5 major revenue sources, in an ideal scenario, each of them accounting for an equal revenue proportion. So putting that, in 5 tranches of 20%, just figuring out ways to build resilience. And then we're constantly testing new things, but we'll put anywhere between 1 and 3 people on a new project and wait to see the effect. If there is traction, then we'll start putting a lot more effort behind it. If it's not, then it was a failed test, and we fail as often as we succeed on that. So it's just constant experimentation. But for the most part, after a while, you at least have a portion of the business that is running quite smoothly overall. And so it's managing the parts that are running smoothly, reassessing, how much longer do we believe those businesses wouldn't run smoothly? Is there something along the lines? How rapidly are we building new businesses to manage the decline of the existing ones, as well as hopefully compensating and continuing to allow us to grow? So there's just many different variables in the mix. I think that the cultural element of just the way that we've had in the past, we have. I could not think of a team where we have more shared trust among the team, and so we're very open at all times with what's going on. Is really try to not compartmentalize. People are empowered from a very early stage. The way that we like to talk about it for the longest time is, typically companies may set up certain operational guidelines for the potential that 3% of people coming into your organization could be dangerous or could do something bad to the business. So, I need to build all of the defenses, etc., and processes and the reporting and accounting and, expense reporting, blah, blah, blah. And we really didn't have any of that, because we're like, why do we want to make life miserable for 97% of people on the team with that, when we're just trying to protect for the 3%? And we're like, well, when the 3% occurs, we'll handle that separately, but we don't need to hurt everybody else in the business.
So you defaulted on trust.
Very much so. I mean, look, I don't know if it's, my business partner is Swedish. I think that, if you know anything about Scandinavia, is that Scandinavia is really one of the highest trust regions in the world. And I think that there was some of that from the beginning, really empowering our team. Our experience has been that the more you entrust and empower an individual, 90% of the time they'll rise up to the occasion. If we've done a good job at picking the right individual from the beginning. I mean, it's a really, that level of confidence in them is essential. So we've done that. I think, most people on the team would say that, we've been very consistent in that, and that we treat everybody like a grown-up. We're not here to run a kindergarten, and we treat everybody like they're making a unique contribution in their own area, and that's the type of people that we like working with. So I think that's also been an important element of keeping that together.
What about the grit aspect of it?
Well, yeah, I'm not. What's her name again? Who wrote the book Grit?
Angela Duckworth.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think very frequently about it. I don't know if this is something that you can teach. I mean, just the way that we've operationalized this is, we've also had the benefit of at the senior team to really only lose a couple of people over the last 10 years. And so people have had the benefit of seeing the story and of realizing, hey, there was this inflection point and we could have gone past, but, Andrew and the rest of the team did this and they set us in this direction. So typically what we would do on the circumstances like that, we would ask the team, we would share what's going on. We'd say, let's say, whether it's a crisis or not, we say either we have a big problem, small problem, crisis, whatever it may be. We need your help because we need to get this, if we don't handle this properly, it's going to be a big problem. And then typically everybody kind of stops doing, or at least spends a portion of what, allocates a portion of their time to helping us solve that problem, and we all get on board together, and we're all kind of helping. It's kind of, everybody paints the house, puts the thing, and blah, 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 helps along. And then when we're done, it's like everybody's thank you very much. And then everybody goes back to doing what they're doing. But, when we have this, there's camaraderie among everybody from the senior team to everybody in the company. And there's an understanding that, hey, we know if there's a team or a brand that's having problems, it's kind of, what do you need? How can we help? And then we will get all hands are on deck and we help and we fix it, and then we move on until something else, another hole opens up and we need to fix that one.
Do you believe that I can be sort of tested? Yes, new people join your team, or
Well, they may not be. The new people join the team depends. How senior they are coming in. Typically, people will earn their seniority. We have had a tendency not to hire senior people. We haven't had the need for, and if we have that need, then typically we would rather hire a consultant or a contractor that has a very unique skill that can assist us for whatever time period it is, and then that if it's somebody we feel we would like to or need to work with on an ongoing basis, obviously it would be different. So we're not again so focused because the core of our team, I'd say at least 60% have worked with us for a minimum of 5 years, and then within the core team, a minimum of 10 years. So over that period of time, you build a rapport, a friendship that transcends a lot of things. So you kind of do that. Perhaps also running a virtual organization means that we surprisingly perhaps bond better together because you actually don't have the physicality. So when we have the opportunity to engage with each other, you want to make the most of that. So it has not been our experience to be a problem with new people coming on the team. On the contrary, I think that they have the opportunity to demonstrate how they are making their own contribution at an early stage, with something, because they hear all of the stories of all the other things that have been done before.
So I ask these questions because, well, one, I believe all entrepreneurs, people who are eager to operationalize or build high-performing organizations, or even better themselves as leaders, they want to cultivate these skills. That's my core belief, that these skills can be cultivated. And part of everything that you share really help demonstrate that it's not just knowledge, right? You have it in a theoretical level. It's not just experience, but through the narrative that you share with us, you really embody your own journey, right? So it's not just from an empty place that you share these stories. So, however, you do have 30 plus years of experience doing it. So I wanted to perhaps share with the people who are listening to this. They are in the middle of building a very new organization. They do want to get better at it. Is there some educational resources or books that you can send them to, or do you believe that it's just you got to go through the process to really earn all that wisdom?
Look, it's I think it's a bit of both. I mean, it happened in my case I started, as I said earlier, I studied architecture, so I didn't even have a business background. But if there was one thing that I learned in architecture was, learning to learn. So everything was new projects. So in a way, I set out to entrepreneurship. I was like very excited. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm becoming an entrepreneur. So now I just have to learn about entrepreneurship. And I think for the first 10 years of starting, I read, a book a week was probably about average. And I knew I just had to immerse myself in an area. And I was also following my instinct. I let this go, as far and wide as I felt, I was just absorbing absolutely everything that I could. And, as you...
Are there any books that comes to mind that you say, all right, if you're new at this, or if you're between the revenue of this and this, read these 3 books, or anything like that?
I think that books that, they were just books that had particular relevance for me at different times. I think that and I can talk to how certain books inspired me, or how important they were, and that 2 that have been coming up recently, just because they really played a very important role in my thinking of when I was starting this last business. One is called. One is called Getting Everything You Can Out of All You've Got. And it's a title that, the book just caught my attention because of the title. I'll talk about that in a second. And the other one was Now Discover Your Strength. And so there were 2, and they're relatively, now they're probably about 15 or 20 years old. But I think that for the first one, there was an important element. As an entrepreneur, you always think that somebody else knows something better than you do, and that you need to spend a lot of time kind of fixing the things that you don't know or that you're not doing properly, and so on and so forth, and you can have a chip. Or at least at the time, I was very conscious about all the things that I wasn't doing properly, and kind of certain lack of confidence in my own ability to run the business. And the book, the Now Discover Your Strength, really kind of allowed me to basically the premise of the book is that, if you're spending all of your time fixing things that you're not good at, you're pretty much going to spend the rest of your life doing that, because there's always something you're not going to be good at. And if instead you focus in polishing, first identifying and polishing the things that you're truly unique at, or that you're gifted at, you're going to have a much better chance of leveraging those gifts going forward. The second book with, Now Discover Your Strength, really does the same thing. I'd always been concerned, you start, and I'm probably one of the few angel investors that always start by telling people that I'm going to try very hard to figure out ways for you not to raise money, and to certainly think about you not wanting or needing the money. But this was from experience and my own problem at the time. There was such a long list about what I felt I needed to start my business. I need the money, so I need to find investors. I need to get other people. I need these people with the technical skills to do this. It's just all of the things you don't have, all of the pieces. And ultimately what, Now Discover Your Strength helped me to do is he says, look, just sit down, take a deep breath, and start writing a you asset list. What can you think of all of the things that you have that might be considered unique to you? And I did that exercise, and I ended up, and I looked at it, and I was like, that's not bad. There's really a lot of very unique things, and it gave me a lot of confidence. And the combination of the 2 was like, what? I'm just gonna try it differently. So I did everything on my own. I started. What's that?
Before we move on, can you share with us what are those 2 superpowers that you have?
Well, I don't know if I would synthesize them, but I think that, definitely one of the ability to see very far. So friends, says that he considers that I have a telescopic vision. So I'm really able to come to logical conclusions about something fairly far out. Perhaps same sense that I had when I saw the first smartphone and understood that in very earliest days that everybody was going to have a smartphone. When the probably best quote that I recall from the time was that only geeks would ever want to have a computer in their pocket. So that proved to not be the case, and I felt very strongly about that. In the same vein, for some reason, this kind of very hard approach to business, perhaps merging, I tend to have a more design and creative sensibility, now fused with business acumen, but somehow also not necessarily things that seem to go together very well. But I felt strongly that that's what I wanted to do from the beginning, which is why some of the elements that we said, or that I mentioned earlier about the design playing a unique role. I think I have also a pretty good intuition where I'm able to find people and understand very rapidly with people whether we are aligned in our mindsets or not. So, and that has allowed me to, find an amazing business partner, and then to also attract other similarly minded people to the business. Just to pick two.
So that actually segues really nicely to my next question, right? Going back to the juicy question that we promised the people who are listening, the consciousness aspect of it. So now that you have exited from the company, and can you share with us what inspired you to your interest, your new passion around consciousness?
Look, it's I think it's a confluence of any number of things. One of them started around early time with my son. My son was 2 years old at the time, and I started asking myself, what would make me a good father? And I asked myself that for a while, and eventually I had the epiphany that if my son could leave home at whatever age, but let's say 18, with the best habits that I've been able to form in him or support in him, then I think he has a huge leg up in life. Correcting bad habits is very difficult, very time consuming, and very draining. So it's not, it's kind of starting with the depleted battery is not exactly the amount, what you care for. And personally, I don't think that any amount of money would compensate for that. It's just not something I believe in. As I mentioned earlier, I actually think that money tends to be a shortcut as opposed to one that pushes you to bring more creative thinking to problems, as opposed to assuming that you can fix problems with money. And that's definitely also a skill that over time in the business, has been amazing to have, is that we solve problems using our heads and our hands, as opposed to trying to mitigate our ability to think through those problems. So, I was just thinking through that. So, focused on habit formation, and I realized, as I was beginning to study habits, that, number one habit that he's going to pick up on are going to be his parents, and so myself included. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. So that means now I need to start focusing on my habits, and how, the good ones, the bad ones, and what I'm going to do about that. And so it made me very conscious about that element. Then I had I think I was well served on a number of fronts about for this journey. Then I had an episode of a double heart attack.
You did?
About 4 years ago, and which also kind of it's a moment. I mean, there was a punchline in the end, but for 72 hours I had a double heart attack and a cardiac catheterization to demonstrate that, and really, it's a very centering moment, when you're confronted with your mortality. And in my case, it was interesting synthesis. First, just a lot of guilt towards my 2-year-old son and my just very young wife. I mean, young in terms of how long we were married. The second one was kind of, sense of really no regret. I was very glad that, I wasn't blaming anybody for where I was. I was very happy that I was in a time and place that I had brought myself, which is exactly what I had been wanting to do all along. So that felt very liberating. The third one, kind of a really sense of peace. I mean, I was like, well, I'm here. If I have to go, I've done my best. I'd rather not, but if I have to, well, nothing more to do. So really kind of a very serene moment in that respect. And then the fourth one was kind of just a bit of, regret insofar as I felt I had built a very strong foundation for my life, for my business. But, when people look at a foundation, there's nothing to look at. And you can be as strong as you want underground, but people are like, well, what am I looking at? And I said, well, it'd kind of be nice to have just a little bit more time to put something on top of that foundation so that people could have a better look about what my intent was. And then shortly thereafter, I was also a dear friend, invited me to a meditation retreat. And I came to that, it was actually just after, I was at TED at the time, about 3 years ago. And for some reason, while I was at TED, one of the top things on my mind was about the idea of reconciling in my own head the difference between the me and the we. Okay, and which is actually something, on a personal note, as people will have noticed from my accent. I've lived in 10 countries on 4 continents. I've been exposed to a lot of different cultures, and different cultures have different levels of understanding of the me and the we, and it's something that I had never really reconciled. And so I go really knowing nothing. I've never meditated before. I've never been in a lotus position, and there I am for 2.5 days with about 50 people, and going into very deep meditation. And I'm there with this story in my mind, like, okay, well, let's at least make this thing productive. This is what I'm, the question that I have, or the challenge that I have. And I was able to really do a full synthesis of that in the 2.5 days. It's almost like, if you've had the experience, that you have this total synthesis, you have the essence of a thought that is able to come out. And I had like this nugget, and this nugget came out as a poem that I wrote after deep breathing exercise, and that synthesized, how I had experienced this between the me and the we. And in the process, I also had, at least what I was then told, apparently something called the overview effect, which is what astronauts experience seeing Earth from outer space. It's a very unique experience. It really feels like, you're connecting with the whole universe. And I brought all of that together, and I guess from that moment on, I was pretty hooked on the whole consciousness journeys. So bringing that, between me thinking about being a good father, thinking about my mortality and coming out of that, and suddenly being awakened to something that for the first time felt that I could really think of myself outside of myself, which was not something I'd been used to, and not, I think, again, back, definitely the heart attack episode, already makes you much less concerned about your ego. I mean, it liberates you in so many different ways to think about more meaningful things. Suddenly I had these 3 things coming together in a relatively short period of time, about 18 months, that seemed to really gel a particular path. And ever since then, I've just continued on this analysis. I was then, part of also, I think the 4th step is that I came to a point in my life where I had, I was seeing a lot of things I had been seeing a lot of things at this degree for at least 20, 25 years, but that where I didn't do anything about it, either because I felt, I was too young, not smart enough, or not knowledgeable enough in a particular area. So, what do I have to contribute? Somebody else much smarter than myself and much more, deeply involved is going to come and do something about it. And as I grew older, I kind of felt that I actually saw very few people doing something about it, at least not that. And I said, okay, well, I guess now I need to add my own 2 cents to the mix. And I decided to support a non-profit financially. And as they onboarded me, they asked me a question. They said, listen, Andrew, we really don't need you to be passionate about everything, because we cover many different areas. It'd be really helpful to us if we understood what your core passion was. And that question then led me on a journey of a couple of months, and eventually I came out to understand that really my core passion is the way, understanding how we distribute knowledge in the system and how we grow through that knowledge. I think that it's absolutely core to my thinking. I think that our entire society is ultimately based on this diffusion of knowledge, which really, and I'm using the word knowledge, I think they touch upon its knowledge and wisdom. I prefer to go further into the wisdom, but really those 2 elements are critical to me. And I see that, the more we veer away from considering that that's an important pursuit as a society, I think the more bad things happen, or the more people decide to create smoke and mirrors to hide this. So and it's a very complex thing. It's something I'm obviously, having run a media company for 15 years, gives me a little bit of an insight in that as well. But really that was key, and I believe that somehow, as I was developing that thesis of diffusion of knowledge, I uncovered any number of other things that started making sense of the world for me, about how things operated and why certain things were not functioning properly, at least or decaying or dying or something like that. Obviously, I had some experience in that. And I lived in Venezuela for a number of years, a country that I absolutely adore, and to see a country so rich in potential, and the wealthiest country in Latin America, to now be a humanitarian crisis, kind of very sad to see, and also showcases some of the difficulties in assuming, and as an entrepreneur, I look at it and say, well, this is has infinite potential, and now went from the possibility of infinite potential to really an incredible amount of hurt in the process, with people having to suffer all kinds of things, from hunger to having to depart the country and so on and so forth. So it's something that was very much on my mind. And part of the process of this knowledge led me to structure a framework of trying to understand, what happens in this diffusion of knowledge, and I saw that. Before
you share the framework, I want to ask a follow-up question about just some terminologies that you use.
Yeah.
So there's no shortage of information, right? Given the internet, right? There's literally, I don't remember the number of information that comes out.
So let me define that.
Yeah.
What I mean is, if you Google it, you'll see that this, since about the 70s, on the advent of personal computers slightly earlier, a new word came out called data, to define this raw information that was coming out of computers. So really we have 4 buckets. So at the lowest end we have data. So think, it's vast in quantity. I mean, it's humongous and growing exponentially these days. But it has on a point basis, it has almost no value. I mean, a data point has almost no value. So huge quantity, very low data. The second bucket is information, and information you have slightly less of, very slightly more value. Then you go up the curve, and you start getting into an exponential curve. With knowledge, you have considerably less amount, but considerably higher value. I mean, it really grows very rapidly from that. And then wisdom is at the very top of the exponential curve, and it's very tiny and incredible value. I mean, almost invaluable. So,
what actually, can you give us some examples, giving those, because I get it, right? I just intellectually grok it, and just for people who are listening, what would be an idea of, let's say, knowledge and then wisdom? What would be like an example, so that way they can?
I think that knowledge would be, an example of how to treat a particular disease or cancer. I mean, really, a whole field of whether it's a technical field, engineering, and so on and so forth, about the functioning of, of mathematics, whatever you want. I think all of that bucket is really contained within, a vastly growing, a very interesting bucket.
Okay, and then wisdom, an example would be?
Wisdom for me would be things that transcend knowledge. I mean, there really is a synthesis of that. I mean, wisdom is kind of thinking about, how to think about the love that a mother has for her child, whether it is, in Africa and Asia and South America and the United States, etc. I mean, there's not, there's a natural state of things to that wisdom, or to think about, any number of sayings, pervasive in multiple cultures about, the way you treat others will have an impact on the way they treat you. I mean, things that just, and somebody asked me at some point, I said, what do you mean? Obviously, I've been asked the question a lot of times, what do you mean by wisdom? And I said, look, from my point of view, is wisdom is the largest amount of knowledge contained within the smallest piece of code. That's what became also an important element, tying it back to the habits, is that, knowledge and wisdom, they're ultimately pieces of code. What I find interesting, or at least the way I've been thinking about it, is that we are all made, it's like this podcast, this interview, we're all made up of stories, actually. We're hundreds of thousands or hundreds of thousands of stories, from very tiny ones to bigger ones. And I see those stories as pieces of code, and I think there's good stories and there's bad stories. And wisdom has a tendency to be the cream of the crop. I mean, it's kind of the caviar of in the knowledge bucket. You really, in ideal scenario, and that's the only thing that you would like to be coded with. But that tends to not be the case. So it becomes about understanding your environment, understanding, well, how are you being coded? How conscious are you to that coding? How unconscious you are. So really, that brings us, to the original question. This is really where this emergence of consciousness came, to think of yourself and what you do and how you've done it, and your past, your future, in being able to see that coding and trying to expand upon it, and then also look under the hood and say, well, where did this piece of coding come from? Do I like it? Do I want to change it? How do I change it? What do I change it to? Things like that. And you can only do that by being in a state that allows you to be conscious of that process. And it's definitely not an easy thing to do for many different reasons. I think that...
because it is meta, right? How do you become aware of the awareness itself? That in itself is like, it takes a lifetime to do it. And then also too, when people hear about, I'm awakened, they assume like once you awaken and that's it. But the reality is, it's a moment by moment, continued choice of, okay, now I'm aware, and it very easily, it takes no effort at all, no energy at all to go back to, being affected by circumstances and believing those stories, because they're so ingrained in all of us.
Yeah. And as you say, I think you get there by, progressively, tackling point by point. The problem is, everything is a dynamic system. So, as you tackle or heal one, another one may spring up. And so it's a continuous process. But at least now you're giving the tools to do that, which previously you just didn't have, to be able to look under the hood, as opposed to being... So you become an actor and a participant and a creator in the process, as opposed to being affected or just a spectator, and where you don't have the tools to engage at that level. And I think that's what, in my opinion, or at least that's my pursuit within the consciousness movement, is to get to that.
So have you, since we're at a conference for a good 2 days, have you seen anything promising that will help, scale the awareness of oneself?
Look, I think it's early days. I would treat it like the birth of the smartphone. So since I've lived through that entire story rather intimately, let's say that we're entering kind of year one of a more meaningful mass adoption of this. And there's many flavors of it, perhaps in the same way that there were multiple operating systems in the smartphone wars. Here, there's different flavors with people coming at it, either with the plant-based medicine, with the technology, the meditation, and subsets of meditation include, maybe exposure to nature, which would be another one. I've seen some very interesting people doing some amazing stuff there. Just breathing. There's an entire new body there on that. You can think of anything simpler to affect change than to rethink the way you breathe. There's a lot of things that are emerging, and I think you alluded to it earlier. Very exciting. Do I think? I don't know if I have the certainty that this will happen, and that it will have an impact, and that it will touch as many billions of people as the smartphone revolution has. What flavor that will be right now, I don't know. I think it's too early. So it's more about a focus on the space as a whole that is meaningful to me. And as you also alluded to earlier, is to see the caliber of the people entering the conversation, and what impact that may have on a going forward basis. So I think we know where we're going, and it will grow with increased intensity. What the dominant flavor is, I don't know, and I actually hope, I was talking about it yesterday, I hope that actually it doesn't end up being a war of operating systems of the drug camp saying, no, my solution is better, we get to better consciousness doing this, or no, it's the other ones who go, no, you can only achieve it through meditation, and so on and so forth. I think that kind of would be a sad outcome. So hopefully it's actually everybody coming together and just realizing that, what needs to happen is a synthesis of understanding that there will be different strokes for different folks, and some people who can attain what they're searching for via drugs or technology or meditation, a combination thereof, etc., is something that should be looked at. I also don't think that we necessarily have that portfolio understanding today about what, how would you engage with somebody and rapidly be able to determine what the best path for that person would be, and to, helping a friend or helping a family member, etc. Would you recommend drugs to them? Would you recommend technology, meditation, so on and so forth? So hopefully we'll have a better sense of that as well, and also have, which I hope to see, that some of the people who are most involved funding certain areas, individual areas, may actually become equally focused and really taking a very broad understanding of something that is, whether you want to call it healing or path to consciousness or whatever your flavor for that is, that they can see that the entire ecosystem needs to be supported and not just one flavor of it. So that would be my, certainly the way I'm starting to think about it.
So you are one of the converted, right? You had a what do you call it? The overview effect experience.
Yeah.
Right. You go to these conferences. You're engaging in a very metaphysical type conversations right now. So, and also people who are listening to this, they already are bought into this conscious conversations, right? Because we inquire about what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to be fulfilled? So on and so forth. That's the purpose of this podcast. But to the people who are not yet converted yet, about just the inquiry of all of this, what would you say to them? Hey, I'm now here, I've achieved quote unquote success, monetary success, so forth, and this is the thing that I'm thinking about these days, and you might want to consider that too. What would you say to people who are not even aware of this consciousness movement?
Look, I think that there needs to be a starting point. So the interesting thing, So as I say, I started my first company when I was 23 years old, and for the longest time, you're battling, or you're on a quest, and you think that there's like literally only one thing you need to think about, and if you're not thinking about that one thing, you're wasting your time doing other things you shouldn't be doing. And the one thing is, build your business, make money, and so on and so forth. And really, at one point, after a number of cycles, let's say, within 7 or 8 years of thinking like that, you kind of, I came to a conclusion where I was like, well, that's really, if I do just that, there's something wrong in the whole message here. And I started, building an outline that I called the 7 pillars about what I felt the things you needed to look at should be. And that was, and in no particular order, the personal, the professional, the financial, health and fitness, faith and spirituality, and I always miss a couple. But let's say I understood there was a broad spectrum of things I needed to think about, at least, that nobody had really properly verbalized. I'd met you asked me earlier, I had read hundreds of business books, probably getting close, and I still have every single one of them, so I can attest to that. And none of the literature I had ever read, even touches upon this thing. It's like, how do you build a life on top of of being an entrepreneur, and how do the two commingle? And I got to understand that if there wasn't at one point, there doesn't have to be, there will never be a perfect balance. So, and the way that I started thinking about it is like, you need to, each of the pillars can be at 0 or 10. If all of the pillars are at 0, you're dead. And if all of the pillars are at 10, you're not human. You're probably a being. So, there's going to be a baseline somewhere, and, you may have, whether you have, you're doing poorly physically or something, where it's a mild injury, a bigger one, or you're having financial problems, you kind of need to set what's your map at any given time. And then you know that you have 100% of energy to dedicate. And if you dedicate 100% of your energy to only one pillar over a very long period of time, it means that you're not applying any amount of energy to any one of the other ones, and they'll decay. And if they do that, that means at one point you're going to have to put a lot of energy there. So ultimately what makes the most sense is just to, one, become aware of it, at least think about it, add it as a list of, they may be secondary or third degree priorities, but they cannot be 0. You need to think about them. And then decide how much you're willing to allocate to each of them. It may just be 5% here, 5%. You can still do a lot by saying, okay, 7 pillars, I'll allocate 30% to my 6 pillars, but I still allocate 70% to just the professional one, the business. That's fine. But it just wasn't something that I was really doing. I was like all head in the business, and there was just nothing. It was like anything else just didn't make any sense to me. And that helped me to begin to build this framework about that you need to build more than one thing at a time. And it applied both within the business, that it's not just an understanding, it's not just about making money within the business. There are a lot of other things that you need to think about. And so it just gave me a more granular vision of what I wanted to do than where I had started at.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's leave it at that. What a beautiful way to complete our conversation. We went a lot of different spaces in this interview. Thank you so much for dropping your wisdom, your experience, and your knowledge. I have it that this would really help propagate, right? Really disseminate the knowledge of the world. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you.
Thank you, CK, and thanks to your audience also.
Beautiful.